Welcome to the stream. I'm Femi Oke. A group of atomic scientists warns that the world stands at 2 minutes to midnight. That's their way of showing how close the world is to nuclear war. Can anti-nuclear activists stop the doomsday clock? Send your thoughts through Twitter and YouTube. The recent test of a US missile has heightened alarm among anti-nuclear activists that a reckless new arms race threatens humankind. The launch of the modified Tomahawk missile on August the 18th came just 2 weeks after the US formally withdrew from a missile treaty with Russia. That was after 32 years. But the actions of other countries are also fraught with risk. Analysts say that a recent radioactive explosion in northern Russia is a sign that Moscow is developing new weapons that can evade missile defense. And differences between nuclear-armed India and Pakistan over Kashmir have jangled nerves across South Asia. What can activists do to convince the world leaders to abandon the bomb? For more, we are joined today by Cecily Thompson-Williams. She's Executive Director at Beyond the Bomb. That's a grassroots campaign to prevent nuclear war. From Geneva, we have Beatrice Finn, Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. The campaign won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. And Achin Vinayak is a founding member of India's Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament and Peace. He joins us from New Delhi. Hello, everybody. It is really good to have you here. This is not a conversation that is on top of the headlines right now, but many of our online community feel that it should be. Take Tristan, for instance, Tristan Gayet. Here's how she feels we should start our conversation. Have a look.
Young people today are facing so many existential crises that it's really hard to ask them to focus on just one. But at the end of the day, nuclear weapons and sole authority are not just one issue. It will cripple our climate. A single nuclear exchange will put us into a nuclear winter. And one person gets to make that decision. So to me, that's just the antithesis of democracy. But the problem is that these issues don't get talked about enough. There's such a lack of awareness that that's really the only barrier to getting people involved, no matter how old they are.
Beatrice, have you found that there's a lack of awareness with your work as you're trying to engage people around the world to be aware of where our nuclear arms are, what danger they may pose to us?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a lack of awareness, but it's not really surprising given it has so many issues right now that requires our attention. And the fact is that most people do know what nuclear weapons are. They know they're bad. They know the mushroom cloud. So I think it's more, my sense is the biggest problem is that people feel disempowered. People feel like they can't really affect this issue. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding right now on this issue.
Ceci, I'm just looking here at the estimated global nuclear warhead, the inventory, and looking at the countries who have them. The United States, the UK, France, Israel, Pakistan, Russia, India, China, North Korea. Now, should we look at this map and be terrified?
Yes, I think we should be. I think that it's healthy for humanity to understand the risk that we are facing with nuclear weapons and looking at the hotspots that we find in the world. There are nuclear weapons in almost all of them. So I absolutely think that we should be terrified, but I think we also should turn that into action. And I think as Beatrice noted, the challenge is that people don't know that they can have a voice. They don't know that they can play a role in changing the system.
Achin, you know very well about what it means to have a voice. You have been campaigning for nuclear disarmament for so long. We really appreciate your veteran voice in our conversation. Let me share with you some of the recent comments we've had as we've set about doing this show. This is Mohsin Baba. He says, nuclear weapons, of course, mass destruction, like in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but paradoxically, they can be a weapon of peace also, especially when both countries are nuclear armed. Your response to that? Nuclear weapons have stopped us from going to war.
Well, this is the old story about deterrence and the fact that deterrence is supposed to have worked. And deterrence is based upon the idea of generating extreme fear. If you want a simple one-sentence definition of security through nuclear deterrence, it goes like this. It's the irrational belief that terrible fear will somehow always ensure that your enemy will behave the way you want, although you can never fully control the circumstances which will determine your enemy's behavior. It's ridiculous. In fact, the reason why I say is that for so many reasons. Number one, there is a logic of what is supposed to be deterrence, even by those who uphold it, and that is that it's enough to have what's called a second strike capacity. That is to say, if your opponent uses nuclear weapons on you first, you have enough to hit back, and therefore you won't use it first. Right? But how on earth does this explain what has happened since 1945? And that is this enormous overkill of enough weapons to blow up the world many times over.
Yeah, just looking back at this map here, United States have got 6,000 nuclear weapons, more than 6,000. Russians have got more than 6,000. Why would you need more than 6,000? Surely you only need one or two. Beatrice, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really goes to the point of the whole issue, that this idea that threatening to mass murder civilians is somehow acceptable. I mean, of course, you can always get people to do what you want by threatening terrible things with terrible consequences, like bullies do. But it's not sustainable. It's not going to last. And the consequences of nuclear war are so unimaginable, so unspeakable, that it's not going to be worth it in the end. And it's very hard to prove the absence of something. We've also seen nuclear armed states go to war to each other. We've seen really close situations, like very recently in India and Pakistan, where we have these huge tension. We've seen the military conflict there escalate, and nuclear weapons could be used one day.
I think also one of the
Can I just...
Cecily, you go ahead. And Achin, hold tight 1 minute. Cecily's going to go ahead, and then you come in second. Go ahead,
I think
Cecily.
one of the really critical factors here, and Beatrice, you laid the groundwork for this, is that people feel as though this is such an overwhelming existential threat that it's just psychologically, they just shut down, right? They don't know how to address it. They don't know how to deal with it. And so they just turn to other issues. And there are so many other issues today to choose from that It's very easy to not pay attention to this one. Because in reality, on a day-to-day basis, this isn't affecting people until it does, right? And then it's catastrophic and it's too late. So I think from our perspective, when we look at how we get folks to engage in nuclear advocacy, we talk about, okay, your issue, whatever it is that really drives that passion in your heart, whether it's immigration or in climate change or women's rights. Today is Women's Equality Day. And so we know that there are these huge movements working on all these other issues. Okay, those things are going to be negatively impacted should we have a nuclear catastrophe. And it is part of the broader progressive space to say we need to protect all of that work by preventing nuclear war.
Achin, go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to say, taking up Beatrice's point, the most likely use of nuclear weapons is not that one side which has nuclear weapons will suddenly decide, okay, we're going to use it against the other. The danger comes when there is a conventional conflict. And that's why the India-Pakistan situation is so dangerous, because we've had 4 conventional conflicts. And what happens once there's a conventional conflict is that there is always the possibility of what's called an escalation dynamic. That is to say, 2 sides which start off by saying we're not going to use nuclear weapons, reach a position where they keep the thinking that maybe the other side is going to use it, therefore I'm going to have to use it, and tensions escalate. So they may have started off by not wanting to use it, but they move to a position when it becomes very serious. And in practice, in the 1999 conflict between India and Pakistan, both sides prepared to use it. The second point, which is the whole question about deterrence, which I just want to make a point, is that Beatrice said very correctly that this is a counterfactual. How do you explain something that has not happened?
Yeah. Let me just,
right? So, but the point,
actually, let me just bring this in as well, because our community are also wanting to be part of this conversation here. This is Fun Life CJ. Fun Life says, nukes keep everyone accountable, but it is a tricky thing. Sovereign governments should have them, not unstable countries. I think we're witnessing right now a difference between what countries may be stable and unstable. I say no more. Beatrice, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, we think that some people are responsible enough to have these weapons, and it's okay if they have it, but others will be really dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really dangerous way to look at the issue, because if some people have it, others will always going to have it. And who's responsible is extremely subjective today. And but I think that what really Cecil also talked about was that this is an issue that's so connected to other issues. This is really about power. People have made nuclear weapons into something special, like it's a technical issue. Yeah. It's not. It's about power and dominance and privilege. And there are some countries that have taken the power to dominate the rest of the world and say that you have to listen to us, you have to do what we want. And this is the anti-nuclear movement is a sort of like a justice movement about making it equal. Everyone has the same right. Nobody should live under this threat. No one have that power. No one has the right. No one is better. These two nuclear armed states that have the biggest arsenals, Russia and the United States, are clearly not the most responsible governments at the moment.
Beatrice, you make such a great point. It's something that Dan Solet online actually talked to us about. He describes himself as a child of the atomic age. This is what he says here. It's just gotten, and we're talking about being part of the nuclear disarmament movement, it's gotten way too technical. The general public doesn't cope well with shades of grey. Let me remind you, by going back to the 1980s, some of the huge protests that happened during a movement known as the nuclear freeze. And you can see how engaged the public was around the world at the time. Have a look.
The time has come, and they have come to speak of many things. From Bologna, Italy, and Beatrice, Nebraska, Edogawa, Japan, and East Harlem in New York City. A great ingathering of people, some to demonstrate, some to make a beginning, some to challenge, some non-violently to bear witness. But sharing a single idea, all governments must stop the madness of nuclear armament.
Cecily, there was so much energy back at that time. People were genuinely thinking about, how do I stop this? How do I stop global leaders? How can we do it? And progress was made. How do you reinvigorate the movement today?
Well, I think what we have right now is a reinvigorated movement around creating positive change in general, but it's very diffuse, right? We have Women's March and we have the Sunrise Movement and the work that they're doing on climate change. I think it is imperative that nuclear activists are integrating into these broader movements and really showing that this is an issue that doesn't stand alone. I think we're finally at a point where society is beginning to see that all of these issues are interrelated because our system is fundamentally broken. And so we need to address them through system change together.
Achin, yeah, go ahead. What's that look like for you?
Yes, I think on one hand, when you talked about the nuclear freeze movement, always remember that the anti-nuclear movements in Europe were in fact even more progressive. In the United States, they talked about nuclear freeze. In Europe, in the END, the European Nuclear Disarmament Movement, talked about a nuclear free zone from Poland to Portugal, which of course is much stronger. The other point which Cecily makes, I think, is very, very important. What is the lesson that we can learn from these remarkable anti-nuclear movements in the United States and in Europe and in Japan of the 70s and 80s? And that is that fear cannot be the basis for a prolonged struggle.
Right.
Yeah, there was fear there. That gave rise to a great sense of mobilization. We have to connect the anti-nuclear struggle, and Beatrice has also said this, we have to connect it to positive notions of justice. And I suggest that, for example, two things which have been mentioned earlier, which are very, very important to connect, is these two things that actually threaten the existence of humanity, which is the ecological devastation and the question of nuclear weapons. And we also have to connect it to a third aspect, which is very important. We live in a world which, for the first time in human history, there is no global scarcity of resources. And yet over 2.5 billion people do not have basic needs. And you have the most incredible inequalities of income, wealth, and power, which of course undermines democracy and hollows it out. So I think these three things have to be connected. And you have young people connected to the ecological movement. You have others who are very much concerned about poverty and so on. And we have to connect these, and we have to go beyond the national framework. We have to develop and promote a sense of internationalism, even as, of course, as we have to start at the national level.
I'd like to, I want to build on that because I think here in the US we have a very unique situation compared to the global movement on this issue. And I think one of the things that really has been a keystone of that is that people are terrified of Donald Trump having his finger on the button, right? And so the fight in many ways has become, let's get Donald Trump's finger off the button. And I think that that's a distraction from the actual situation, which is that the system is broken and he's just a symptom of it. His ability to start a nuclear war if he wakes up in the middle of the night and wants to nuke hurricanes, as recently happened, that is really just a symptom of a system that absolutely is broken. There is no reason that one person should have the sole authority to launch a nuclear weapon just because they feel like it.
Let me share some of the ways that you're actually connecting with people and just reminding them about this. This is your organization Beyond the Bomb on Twitter saying, and this guy has sole authority to launch a nuclear first strike, grimace. And then one more back here, which is Derek Johnson, who is the chief executive at Global Zero. And this graphic here, can Trump get us all killed in a nuclear war? Yes, red, yes, but in blue. That is disturbing.
Yes.
And then I also want to bring in one of our community who was talking about who has responsibility, which countries have responsibility. And Catherine here feels the responsibility should be at the US's feet. Have a listen, have a look.
As much as North Korea has become synonymous with nuclear crisis, I believe that it's imperative for the United States to become a leader in the global anti-nuclear movement, being the first and only country to have used nuclear weapons in the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So as we continue to advocate for nuclear disarmament in countries like North Korea, who have an estimated 20 to 30 nuclear weapons compared to our roughly 6,000, the United States has a moral responsibility to lead by example, to honor its treaty commitments, and to resist spiraling into another arms race, as we're seeing play out with Russia today.
Beatrice, you pick up on that. As an international organization, it takes everybody. But that idea of the US, you broke it, you fix it philosophy.
I think it's, I mean, obviously the United States and Russia are the biggest nuclear armed states. They have the biggest arsenals. But I do think that we need to stop focusing on just some countries, because again, that feeds into the whole, it's out of our hands. How am I supposed to impact Trump or Putin? They don't listen to me. And I think that one of the things that we've been working on is to get all the governments in the world to take steps and take action and make commitments to this. Because if you think about it in other issues, if you want to fight racism, it's not just a problem of Ku Klux Klan. It's a problem of everyone. It's about the inappropriate jokes, about our prejudice, and it's about all the structures in society. And these structures exist with nuclear weapons as well. Our banks keep investing in nuclear weapons producers. Our universities are involved in the nuclear weapons research, for example. Our governments in Europe are exercising with nuclear weapons together with the United States, for example. There are so many more parts to the problem. So I really think that we all have to take a stand. If you are not against nuclear weapon, you are a part of the problem. Everyone.
Let's be practical now, guests, because we're in the last little third of the show. So let's talk about what people can do. We're talking about rebuilding this nuclear disarmament movement. This has just come in live as our audience have been watching you speak and discuss this. World leaders meet regularly for various discussions, but that hasn't brought an end to the production of nuclear weapons. I think a new form of diplomacy should be taken, because one day it might lead to war that's very destructive. Actually, pick up on that. A new kind of diplomacy.
Well, two things. Look, one thing, of course, which is very important is the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Yeah.
And I agree with Beatrice that we have to get non-nuclear weapon states to come together, which they are, and to actually promote and sign and get into force this. Because what they're saying basically is that you nuclear weapon states are criminals. And we say that you're criminals, and that we are going to seek to delegitimize that. And I think that's very important. Secondly, in countries like India and South Asia, the two nuclear weapon states, India and Pakistan, are not going to remove nuclear weapons. We put pressure on them, of course. We'll talk about having a South Asian nuclear zone. But you've got a country like Bangladesh, which has criticized India. And you've got countries like Nepal, which are uneasy about the fact, because if there is an exchange between India and Pakistan, it's going to affect all of them. So in many ways, you have to work around that. So if, for example, the Bangladeshi government, which has criticized and has a foreign minister who said that there should be a South Asian nuclear zone, was to actually follow the Mongolian example and say, declare itself a single-state nuclear weapons, it becomes a politically symbolic slap in the face of India and Pakistan. And we need these kinds of actions as well. We need wider support to get across to the United States that, yes, you are the pace setter here, but we're not just leaving it to you, and we're not just leaving it to the movement within the United States. We're going to solidarize across to point out your criminality of your government as well as the criminality of all other nuclear weapons governments. It's not equally shared, but they're all crooks. And this idea of a responsible nuclear weapon state is an oxymoron. And we have to get that across.
Oh.
And I think this is something that's very important.
Some straight talking there from Achin. Cecily's giving me the eye. What's behind that look?
So I think, I want to say as an organizer and campaigner that's based here in the US, that the global work is so critical. And our work is really focused domestically on US policy, but we are invigorated and we have an energy at the local and state level that is thanks to so much of this global work. So I think, one, that's really critical. But I do think that here in the US, we are at a moment where a no first use policy is within striking distance. We have legislation in both the House and the Senate. We have presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren sponsoring the Senate legislation, the topic being discussed on the presidential campaign trail. We are at a moment where people are scared that Donald Trump has his finger on the button. They recognize that something needs to be done. And we have actual pieces of legislation that will move us forward to a place where we will be in a better position to continue advocating for an end for a ban of nuclear weapons. So I think that we need to seize this moment here in the US and take the opportunity that we can over the next year or two to push for no first use. The public is in support of this policy. Poll after poll has shown that the public supports no first use, that they think in many cases that that's what we already have. They are flabbergasted that it would be allowed for our government to start a nuclear war. So we need to take advantage of that momentum and move forward with pushing for that legislation.
So I guess one of the things that has occurred to me as we've been talking is that this is both a very positive conversation and also quite a negative one as well. I'm going to bring you some negativity from the online community and then wrap it up with some positivity, because that's me. EarthDog58 here. At least once every day since about the age of 11, I have thought that one day an all-out nuclear war will be started by accident. Politicians are never going to give nuclear weapons up, however well organised the protests. That is the negativity. But for the positivity, let me take you back to 2017, where the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons was adopted at the United Nations. I want you to see the joy in this announcement. Have a look.
The treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons has been put to a vote.
The voting has been completed. The machine is locked.
We've just got one country against, the Netherlands, and one country abstaining. This is the moment that the United Nations voted to outlaw nuclear weapons for all time.
Beatrice, you're looking happy there. Was that your big head in the way?
Yeah, that was me.
That was a great moment. Where are we now? I mean, the doomsday clock says 2 minutes to midnight. But in terms of you thinking practically about building this movement, momentum, where are we?
Well, I think that the negative comment there really is completely wrong, because people can influence this. I mean, that's how we change the world. That's how we got human rights treaties. That's how we got same-sex marriage. That's how we got the Geneva Conventions. That's how we ban chemical and biological weapons. This is not just that the presidents of countries just suddenly come up with a good idea and do it because they're nice about it. I mean, politicians change when the public change and when the public demands it. So really, this is an issue where the public actually has all the power. And we can do so many things. We are right now working to get this treaty to enter into force, to really come to make it more of a burden for the nuclear armed states to have nuclear weapons. They're going to get rid of it when the public doesn't like it, when it gives them a lot of disadvantages in international relations. And that's what we're building. So right now we have about 70 countries that have signed this treaty, and we're working to get more and more to the majority of states in the world, and then to start going local in the nuclear arms states. And I think that the Beyond the Bomb doing an amazing job right now with looking at this on a city level, on
the
state level.
positivity of Beatrice Finn, who is actually saying that it is possible to get rid of nuclear weapons. You also heard from Achin Vainayak and also Cecily Thompson-Williams. Achin, you cannot, because we're at the end of the show. But I thank you for all of your thoughts and your input during this conversation, just proving how important that nuclear weapons, having them around the world and maybe seeing how we get rid of them, is still a top issue for us as global citizens. Thank you, guests, for being with us. Thank you, online community, for being with us as well. I'll see you online always at AJ Stream. Take care, everybody.